Hello, and welcome to this episode of Coffee with Kathleen. Let's all take a sip. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story to start out this episode. So 1993, which for those of you that are trying to place things in dates and times, that was the year I graduated high school. And I started college that year as well. And so I was on my computer a lot more. And I remember going to this store to buy actually Microsoft Word so that I could produce more professional looking college papers. I was transitioning from WordPerfect to Microsoft Word, and I thought that that would be helpful. And when I was in the software store, because you used to buy software at the store in a box, in 1993, there was a PC game that was right by the register. And, it was one of those purchases, and I just couldn't resist because it had this like kind of creepy, engaging cover. And it was called The Seventh Guest. I don't know if anybody who's watching this, who's a little older, maybe remembers this game. We also called it T7G. So if you were in the know, it was like T7G. So anyway, this was essentially a maze game, and there was a villain who was an eccentric toy maker named Henry. And whenever you would go down the wrong path, he would mock you by echoing this eerie phrase that kind of, was in this particular voice. And he would say, "Feeling lonely?" And look, I am that person. I could get lost crossing from one side of the room to the other. So I heard that "feeling lonely" catchphrase like a lot of times playing this game. And ultimately I got stuck on some level, and I was never able to get out of that level. And I gave up playing the game because I could not hear that catchphrase like one more time. Right. So recently, for some reason, I, had this little mini crisis, right? And I don't call them depressions. I call them dimples because they're not quite that deep. But I had a little dimple, and I realized that what I was experiencing inside of that dimple was actually loneliness. And that catchphrase was just playing in my mind, the "feeling lonely" in Henry's voice, which, by the way, if you played that game and you want it, like, you can go on YouTube and you can listen to what the game sounded like and remind yourself what that phrase sounded like anyway. And I thought to myself, I wonder if this is a unique feeling to me, or whether this is something that's more so going on in the cultural zeitgeist for executives and other leaders. And what I found out is, as usual, I'm a human being, and I'm connected to other human beings, and I'm connected to what's kind of going on out there in the world. And so there was a 2025 survey of 127 tech founders from California. And of that, super statistically significant number of 127 tech founders, 73 of them are experiencing something that they're now calling shadow burnout, which is more of a persistent exhaustion, a cynicism, and actually is marked by declining cognitive function. But it's different than regular burnout because it's hidden behind continued high performance. And so the study found that 68% of these founders were actively concealing mental health struggles from their investors, boards, other co-founders, or execs. 61% were citing fear of professional consequences. So they don't want therapy records coming up on due diligence. And so they weren't seeking help. So caveat being, that's just a self-selected sort of sample. It's not a population estimate. So we can't say that 73% of all execs are feeling this way or anything. This is just one particular study. But I was interested in this because the defining feature there is not the exhaustion, it's the gap. And what's distinguishing about this or different about this is that performance metrics are staying stable while internal resources are reducing. And one founder described it in a way that really landed. And he described it as running the machine without being inside it anymore. And so there's 3 warning signs to this kind of feeling. One is an emotional detachment from work, and that's usually work that once felt meaningful. 2 is a persistent decision fatigue that doesn't recover after rest. And 3 is an identity fusion where self-worth becomes fused to company performance in such a way that you're not letting company performance suffer, therefore losing your identity, but you do feel somewhat lost inside of it. So it's a narrowing signal as opposed to a complete and total burnout. And so, what suffers when you're in this dimple, as I like to call it? Well, flexible thinking, emotional connection, friendship, curiosity, those things are starved first. And so shadow burnout can hide for a really long time because of this, because again, like the company performance or the team performance, not affected by this. All right. So now we've kind of set the stage for what's going on. And look, I did not stay in this feeling for a super long time. I don't, I can stay in my feelings for a period of time and kind of live with them and titrate and do all of the things, meditate, do all the things you're supposed to do. But ultimately, my curiosity about this sort of provided some antidotes. And I'm not one of those people who's afraid to take care of themselves or who's afraid of, I don't have anything going on that would keep me from seeking help and things like that. So I'm in kind of a different category. But let's talk about this a little more. And then let's talk about whether you're doing all the things you could do to help ameliorate this for yourself. Is any of this landing? Is any of this resonant for you? Are you feeling this way? So, one sign that you might have some of this going on is whether you have any decisions that are weighing heavily on your shoulders. And do you feel like those are your shoulders alone? Do you have accountability or role isolation issues? Sometimes in your role, particularly in corporate environments, or if you're a founder or a leader of a team, you're privy to knowledge and insight that you literally can't share because you either have to protect the strategy, you have to protect the market intelligence, or you need to hold on to it to preserve morale. So I can think of several times in the past where I've had to do that, where I knew that there was a financial issue or a situation that was emerging or something going on. And I simply could not talk about it because it demanded confidentiality. It's very easy when you're a leader for your relationships to become hierarchical or instrumental. So where, you have a certain amount of power, and so you need to hold that. And also where you're managing or connecting with people around the metrics of the job or the performance of the job versus in the details or the emotions of it. And I'll add a 4th one because those 3 came out of the study. My 4th one is that sometimes your team member expectations set an unreasonable standard that doesn't allow for human expression. They expect you to be on all the time. Like one of my superpowers is my ability to be positive. And so sometimes that's a trap because if I'm not super positive, super excited, super on top of things, sometimes my team members have an expectation of me like that. And they're very unhappy with me if I'm not executing that the way I normally do. So the cost of all this isn't just you personally. You might feel like, well, if I'm feeling that way, I can handle it. I'm a resilient person. I'm strong. I've got it. But one other result of it is that it usually narrows your decision making. Again, it puts it all on these shoulders, or it isolates you from curiosity and exploration, which will give you, some of the best answers in your business. Or it causes you to take a more conservative approach. It makes you more unwilling to take risk. And ultimately, that can be really negative for your business and your team. Perhaps you're narrowing even the signals that you're taking in from the market, from the team, from people at large, because you're not sharing the totality of the problem. So if you see any of these symptoms, even if they're not severe or acute, there's some things to be attentive to. And unsurprisingly, I'm going to be encouraging you to make connection. So think about confidential peer groups. There's ones for CEOs. Certainly there's ones for executives at a different level. There's ones for emerging leaders and managers. That can be one of the single best interventions, and leaders who build those report meaningfully better decision quality and emotional resilience. And you can either be part of a formal organization or you can build it for yourself. I had some team members recently complete some leadership training, and they really bonded with the people in the leadership training group. And so one of the things I encourage people to do if they attend a conference or they attend training or something else that's really meaningful for them is to stay connected to the participants afterward. Create your own, informal peer group that will allow you to freely share. Because that's a really important antidote for loneliness. So Indra Nooyi, who is the former CEO of PepsiCo, had her own version, and she phrased it this way: you got to create your own ecosystem and your own kitchen cabinet. I had a group of 5 CEOs, and we would meet every quarter, is what she had to say. And so my version of that, because I'm not a CEO, and maybe you're not either, would be to have a standing call with someone who has no stakes. So in addition to having this confidential peer group, having your own kitchen cabinet, someone who has no stake. And so depending on the strength of your wordplay, you see how no stake fits into a kitchen metaphor really nicely, perhaps. But anyway, that standing call with someone who agrees to do that for you can be really important. It doesn't have to be even a formal mentorship program or anything. It's just someone who is willing to listen, who has some level of business acumen, or who can understand or relate to your struggle without being in the middle of it. And that's because you want to offset the energy cost of concealment. So self-concealment is empirically, meaning scientifically, linked to anxiety, depression, loneliness, rumination. And then, of course, that leads to a whole host of really negative physical symptoms. And ultimately, those symptoms have an effect on your leadership, your company, your team. Long-term, they have an effect on your results. And assuming that you only get this one life, at least this one life in this body, you're literally shortening your lifespan by not doing this. And that feels like too big a price to pay for work to me. So you want to work on this existential isolation. And, look, this is my situation in a nutshell. Really, really. You can have a full calendar, a wide network, a reputation for being the social one. This very much feels like me. Elizabeth Pennell talked about this. And she said, even with all of those things, you can feel profoundly unseen. The issue is not a lack of people. It's a lack of being known. And admiration is not the same as intimacy. So I had to ask myself this question. Like, armor is not required. And when you take the armor off and you just keep it real, you might need to sacrifice your admiration in order to reduce your isolation. And that might mean being really real with your teammates or team members or people working for you. And that intimacy might reduce their admiration of you. And so are you willing to make that sacrifice for your own good? I think there's probably still some things from a power position. You can't completely crash out. You can't completely fall apart. And that's why you need to have other structures in place for yourself to hold that. Going to therapy, obviously, I've talked about that lots of times. Having that standing call, having groups that you can participate in where you agree to drop all that. Those things can be really important. But also potentially dropping some of that need for admiration so that you aren't as isolated. Disclosure is a counterforce, and there's a dosing protocol around this that you can also follow. I've talked about this before, so this is going to feel repetitive if you regularly watch this, but writing your deepest thoughts and feelings about an emotional experience for 15 to 20 minutes across 3 to 4 consecutive days. This is a process that is validated across more than 200 studies, and it shows reduced doctor visits, lower anxiety and depression, and improved immune markers. And who are you disclosing to? Yourself, ultimately. But that's crucial for a busy executive. And even 2-minute writing sessions have shown some benefits. So that mechanism is about building a coherent narrative and really understanding yourself. And so if you find that you're in this mode, it's a great place to actually get started. So it can take energy and effort to set up the call, to set up a peer group, to think, and maybe that's more than you even feel like you can manage at this point in time. So having this 4-day protocol around 15 to 20 minutes of writing can be a great place to get started on this journey. So now we have some protocols. We have recognition of what is happening. We have a peer group. We have a no stakes call once a week. And we have this journal practice. We have this notion of letting go of some admiration to gain some intimacy with our team members or our peers. Let's think also about creating teams that don't need armor. So if we ourselves are not putting on a full face or full armor or whatever metaphor resonates with you here, is that something that you can also create for your team? And in so doing, maybe you're creating something more valuable than admiration. You're creating a team safety net, and you're creating a culture or an environment where people don't need to do that. And so then ultimately they become more fully expressed, more creative, more generative individuals as a result. And then we think about, what does a regular journal writing or meditative practice look like, and what can we commit to? So a lot of times an objection that I hear often is that people will say, well, Kathleen, I just don't have time to meditate with everything else going on. And my response to people is, you absolutely have 5 or 10 minutes a day that you can spend doing something for yourself. And if journal writing is more accessible to you than meditation, then do that. Do that. And yes, look, it could be typing on a keyboard. There is something really physically great about this. And it does activate different things in your brain. But again, the point is to get started. The point is not to make it too complicated. And so if that's too hard for you, or if you don't know how to write cursive either anymore or ever, because there was a period of time where we weren't teaching that in school, then certainly typing can be a great way to get it out. The point is to put up as few barriers as possible to you having access to one of these practices, and then to carving out the time and just doing it. And everybody does have 10 minutes in their day. I don't care who you are or how busy you are. That is just a fact. And so if you can do that, you will start to find this shift. And so here's kind of the question that I can't stop sitting with, that I just keep repeating to myself over and over when I'm in these interactions or these situations for myself. And it is this: what would it cost you to be known? And what is it already costing you not to be? So as a leader, in some way, you've gotten very good at being seen. And if you haven't gotten good at being seen yet, because you're not at that stage of your leadership journey, I have other podcasts that talk about that. But assuming that you've gotten very good at being seen, where is one place that you can identify in your upcoming week where you could be known instead? Not the whole story, so to speak, not even a whole paragraph, just one true sentence where you are in awareness about what you're releasing. You're going to be known instead of seen, and you're going to let fly one true sentence. What loosens? What would it cost you to be known? And what is it already costing you not to be? And one place where you transform from being seen to being known. And how does that start to transform your leadership journey? And I will leave you with that and a cheers to your upcoming Know Yourself More and Let Others Know You More week.